wait. And baby, I'm TFC till I die.
It was a beating so bad that we had to wait to run this until Thursday. Welcome to Toronto Til I Die, the Toronto FC Weekly Fan Podcast. You're with me, Mike Newell, also with Michael Singh. And coming off the subs bench in place of Jeffrey P. Nesker, we've brought in extra special super sub. Sonia Miso is joining us this week. Sonia, thank you so much for coming in and joining this week.
No worries, big spot to fill, but thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem.
Not that big. It's not.
yeah. This might actually be a slow song. Well, I mean, look, a lot going on in the TFC world over the past week. Obviously, we'll get into a little bit of the disaster in Montreal this past weekend. We'll talk about the potential we think should be debut of Lorenzo Insigne and Federico Bernardeschi. We'll talk a little bit about the Michael Singh notebook, of course, and we do have your 3 burning questions this week. But quickly, guys, this past weekend, I was sick as a dog. I was super, super sick. I was actually planning to go to Montreal for the game. Kind of happy I didn't. Sat on my couch instead, watched it.
Shade.
I know it was. Well, I mean, look. Big respects to all the TFC traveling away supporters watching on TV. You were loud and clear throughout the broadcast. That was amazing. But how were your weekends? Hopefully, you weren't coughing and hacking and sneezing like I was.
I'm gonna say Toronto Till I Die. I mean, it's Toronto till you get a little bit sick.
Well, I mean, it's Toronto till I don't, pass around a cold, around Montreal. Didn't feel like doing that. So
no, as the times are, you want to stay home if you are sick. So
absolutely. How were your weekends?
Yeah, pretty good. Honestly, I do this every week. It's like Thursday. I'm already looking forward to the next weekend, Mike. Come on. Last weekend, I don't even know what I did. I don't even know what I did this week.
At some point, gotta go back. Remember, makes the future times better.
Yeah, so no, it was. Yeah, go ahead, Sonia. You can say
not much. I mean, we watched the game from home, and then went to bed sadly afterwards, but. We're looking forward to this weekend. Well, let's look at the positive notes, or hopefully the positive notes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of that, let's before we go forward, let's unfortunately look back a little bit. We talked a bit about it on the Tunnel Club this past week, but I mean, look, the 1-0 loss to Montreal, a 1-0 that could have been 4-5-0. Look, it was one of those games where TFC were never, in my opinion, ever really in it. But, you got to kind of give credit to Montreal. They were able to essentially put a foot on the ball and boss the game for long stretches. And if it wasn't for Alex Bono and Sam Piet not having his shooting boots on, I think we would be looking at a heavier scoreline defeat this past Saturday. But love to get both your thoughts on the match itself and sort of where sort of TFC are going from here. Mike, I'll start with you.
It went exactly as I expected it to, considering that TFC had no designated players in the lineup. They didn't have their best midfielder in Jonathan Osorio, who obviously right before or that same day, they found out he would have to be in concussion protocol. So you take away the quality of those players, and you're going up against a team that was the top half of the Eastern Conference away from home, which TFC have yet to pick up a win away from home. It went exactly as I expected it to, and I thought they did well to continue to battle and stay within, reaching distance in that game. But yeah, definitely heavily outplayed, but that's what I was expecting.
Yeah, it was hard to watch, especially because our last matchup with Montreal kind of gave everybody a little bit of hope. I realize that's under different circumstances, but I mean, personally, I went into that game and sort of every game recently with the idea that I rather at this point have a 0-0 scoreline than win, just to kind of get that sort of clean sheet back onto our books. And so that, like, 1-0 doesn't seem that big, especially when, we have this history with Montreal and we've had interesting score lines with Montreal, to put it lightly. But I think our keepers deserve better, and I'm waiting for that clean sheet, and it's been hard to watch in that point of view. But yeah, it could have gone a lot worse. We still made the highlight reel with that Bono save, as you mentioned. And so I think pulling out the positives, I kind of want to look at it as like the bookend of the chapter of Toronto FC before we had this rebuild and this rebranding, which is, something that we say every season or every like 3 seasons now, I guess. So let's leave it at that. And Saturday is going to look completely different, or at least I hope so, and hope that I'm not eating my words later on.
No, I think a lot of people feel the same way you do, Sonia, just in regards to that sort of, like you said, like bookending of kind of like an era is not the right word, but like just a period of time where this team has been working with makeshift lineups, makeshift back lines, missing sort of key players, and missing sort of not having the complete picture for the team. And I know the team is not a complete picture as we look at it right now, but we're starting to see potentially the framework of what we hope to see this team be coming into sort of the end of this season and going into 2023. Just really quickly, before we sort of jump off of the game this weekend, there was a lot of talk around on the Tunnel Club, just in regards to Bob Bradley's kind of decision making in terms of the game, whether it becomes the substitution patterns and not subbing until the 80. I think the Jacob Schaffelberg came in like the 82nd, 87, like really late into the game, or just the fact on the goal, in the build up to Montreal's goal, all of a sudden deciding to play it out of the back. What were your sort of feelings on not Bob Bradley as an overall manager? I think we're all agreed that he is going to be the manager going forward and things like that, but more just his decision making in those particular moments. Do you just feel like it was kind of one of those things that was going to probably happen anyway, or more of a, do we have something to actually question Bob about? Because I know that's been brought up a lot in sort of the TFC Live community.
Yeah, for me, there's 2 sides of this. There's the one side is you look at the bench and you're like who does he really have on that bench that's going to make a difference in the game? But the second part of me was, and this is something I observed in the first half, was when you're conceding possession as easily as you are and you're playing mostly on the back foot, does it really benefit you to play with 2 strikers who are not the quickest and aren't that great off the counterattack? For me, I was thinking the whole time that I would love to see Jacob Schaffelberg inserted into the game because of his pace and his ability to kind of get in behind and stretch a defense. Neither Jesus or Io is really capable of stretching a defense when you're not playing with the ball, with possession. And I noticed that early on, and I was wondering, and I'm still kind of wondering what the benefit of having both of those guys on in the game at the same time is. Is it the fact that both of them are prolific goal scorers and are able to get you guys back into the game at any given point? Maybe off a set piece because they're both bigger guys. Was that the reasoning? Were they good to hold up play? I don't have the answer to that. For me, I would prefer to see Jacob Schaffelberg come into the game earlier so that he can give TFC an option off the counter attack. That was my only, I guess, gripe. But at the same time, I look at the bench and I'm like, oh, okay, you're not really working with much either.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think for Bob Bradley, it's you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. I realize that's kind of the case for every coach, but I think especially for him with Toronto, that he tries different things and people critique it. He doesn't try different things and people critique them. And I think everyone's just at a point where he, as you mentioned, Michael, you only have so much to work with. He has only so many players who have been working together for a long time as well. So knowing style of play. I mean, he's a coach that took off Michael Bradley, which is something that we never seen a coach do. By never seen a coach do, never saw Danny do, right? And so he is trying to mix it up. But at the same time, if you only have a limit number of if you only have a limit number of people to be able to put out, people who consistently play together as well, there's only so much that you can do. I think, what he's trying to work for is sort of that August window of, all right, now that we have a healthy bench, now that we have these new players, now that we have somebody in actual leadership who have led teams before, we're sort of a multi-crew right now. We do have Michael Bradley, who has been, the captain, both actual captain and, captain of the ship. But other than that, what sort of overall leadership that can kind of take this multi-crew of players and put them all together and sort of get the best out of them? We need a little bit more consistency on the field, and we need a little bit more communication on the field, in the sense of everybody kind of is working together for that common goal with people that they can look to and work with. But Schaffelberg, for example, right? Who do you personally see as his mentor on the pitch right now? And I don't know if he necessarily has one, especially in the game on Saturday.
Yeah, that's interesting point about Schaffelberg in specific, and a lot of people pointed to him specifically in their comments because they felt he could have made a difference maybe early on, especially because I think Luca Petrasso was struggling a little bit in that first half, playing on that left side with Criscito. I think, Michael, to your point in regards to having two strikers, I agree. I thought in the first half, I'm looking at it, I'm looking like two strikers that kind of aren't really great right now at holding the ball up. So I don't really see the point of that. And I know Jimenez can play out in the wing. He has done that in his career. But is that the most effective way to use him right now? I felt like you could use one and sort of sit the other and bring them in sort of for each other when you need to make a substitution. But, I agree. I feel like Jacob Schaffelberg has gone these last almost 2 seasons now without that mentor that you're talking about, Sonia. And maybe that is going to be an Insigne. Now, obviously, there's rumors that he's in trade talks, or whether that is true or not. That will be interesting to see. But sort of segueing into this first segment, just talking about, the big guns are kind of here now, right? In Insigne and Bernardeschi being introduced early this week, and looks like he's set to play on Saturday. They are in training and here now. So what should fans, I think, expect from both players? Maybe you could talk about a skill perspective. We know they're very good footballers, obviously. But maybe talk a little bit about what they can bring, those intangibles, to a locker room, to a culture. What do you think they're going to bring to the team? Sonia, I'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, it's no secret. I've watched Serie A religiously. I've watched both these guys play, pretty much every weekend. It's interesting. So I don't know how deep you want me to get into this, because I have a lot of thoughts.
Deep dive.
So coming from Napoli is this team that, has always been the bridesmaid to Juventus' bride for the last few seasons. When they managed to be able to, in Serie A in general, when Juventus finally slipped off of that spot, Inter came in and they swooped in and grabbed it. And Napoli has always had this potential. They've always been a really fun team because they have a lot of characters. So even, thinking back about 10, 11 years ago now, when they had Higuain, right? Like, who's now in MLS as well. It's always been this sort of fun style of play that has not been seen in Italy in the same sort of stance as the other teams. They're a very attacking team. They're really fun to watch. They have a lot of energy. They're very colorful. It's a great team to watch. And I think coming here is going to be a bit of a cultural shift for Insigne, because he was such an integral part of that Napoli team. And I don't just mean on as a team member. I mean, the way that he would talk to fans, the way that he would kind of be this conduit between the club and the supporters, the way that he is, the homegrown boy. He is Napoli personified. And I think coming here, let alone like the style of play or anything like that is completely different. I think that we're embracing him now, but the way that we have put him on this high horse may be an unreal expectation, because when you've played on the same team, and I realize he's been loaned out when he was a lot younger, but when you've played in the same team, in the same part of the country, the same style for so long, you cannot just transition that, especially in a North American style, right away. So I think it's going to take him a little bit of time to sort of get his feet out. Saying that, I also said twice very publicly that Javinko would be the worst signing in Toronto FC history.
I remember that. I think I said something similar to.
Who knows what I'm talking about? But I think Bernardeschi is going to adapt a lot quicker. They're obviously playing different roles. They have different sort of expectations, both I think at the club level, at a fan level. I think they both come from two different viewpoints of the field. I think Insigne is going to be a much more serious player. I think he's going to take things a lot more seriously. And that's nothing against Bernardeschi. I think he just doesn't have the same amount of pressure on him. And I don't think he had the same amount of pressure on him at Juventus either. But on a positive note, after I just rambled on for 10 minutes, on a positive note, positive being maybe not the right word, they don't have a World Cup this year. They don't have that pressure of thinking towards December. They don't have that same sort of looking at something bigger. They can actually focus on this season. They can focus on finding roots here. They can focus on how they're going to play. Obviously, they don't have the whole season to kind of figure everything out. They have a very, it's like 1/3 left of the season.
Yes, 13 games or something like that.
Yeah. So they have to do a lot in a very short amount of time. We've seen too with Bale and Cleany too, what have they said about coming to MLS? They both have publicly said, like, this is not what we were expecting. Not necessarily in a bad way, but there are differences, complaining about like the heat and things like that. So I think there is going to be a lot of growing pains. I don't think that they're going to come in and just completely turn this team around. I hope I'm wrong, 100%. Like, call me out if I'm wrong. But I'm worried about putting too many eggs in our basket right now. I don't think that all of a sudden we're going to make a playoff spot or look like we are going to make a playoff spot.
Okay, we'll come to that because there's some stuff here in terms of burning questions that people have been asking that sort of relate to that. So I'm going to hold that and come back to you on that. But Mike, I'd love to get your thoughts because obviously you've been to both press conferences for both players that they've been introduced. You've been to training and seen them in training so far. What do you think they're going to be able to bring to the squad, both from a playing perspective and skill perspective, but also from maybe a leadership perspective, which I think they're going to be leaned on for that?
For sure. And I think the biggest thing is they bring belief with both of those guys and belief within the locker room. It's, going through the 2021 season, obviously you had, the troubles with the pandemic and there are a lot of different things that were adding up, a coaching change, of course. There was never really a light at the end of the tunnel that these guys were kind of looking towards. Like, there was no reason why this team in 2021 was going to drastically improve or get better. But in 2022, we knew Insigne was coming from the jump. It was easier for a guy like Jonathan Osorio, who, at the end of his season, he really said that the year took a toll on him. Playing with Toronto FC, and he couldn't wait to get to, Canadian men's national team games because the environment and everything like that. 2022 has been a lot different because of these guys and sort of the allure that they bring. Of course, they bring a wealth of experience, and I'll turn to this quote actually I just found from Alex Bono, who's one of the I guess best spoken people, not just athletes, that I've been around. So Alex Bono says here, it's a big deal for the club, obviously, and this is him talking about Insigne and Crescito. It's actually before Bernardeschi, but he says it's a big deal for the club, obviously, a big deal for the community and the fans. They enter the locker room He's there on game day. They both came in after the game on Wednesday. You feel like you're in the presence of guys who have a lot of experience, a lot of personality, a lot to share with the group. For me, that's the most exciting part. For the young guys especially, and for all of us to be able to take pieces of what we can from their experiences and what they can help and assist us with, as well as enjoying being on the field with two great players with two incredible resumes and two incredible profiles. So that's exciting for me. It's exciting for the group. So definitely their presence has been felt and will continue to be felt as they work into the group and try and find full fitness for us. That's kind of what Bob Bradley was sort of echoing as well when I asked him, I guess, if expectations are raised now that Insigne is joining the team. And essentially what he said is he spun it off in an elegant way, as Bob Bradley usually does. And he said what he's really looking forward to is how they're going to rub off on the rest of the team. He thinks that just adding them to training sessions every day is going to improve the team because they see the game differently and they think the game differently. Now, when you're looking at Jaden Nelson, who's he been learning off as a left winger the past 2 seasons? The only one was really Jefferson Soteldo, which, as we can kind of realize, is not really the best role model, right?
I like both of our reactions to that.
There hasn't been a great role model at the club for Jaden Nelson. Now he's going to sit there and watch Lorenzo Insigne and how he plays the left wing. Now, what does he see? Hey, maybe I can do those things. So, hey, yeah, like that part's probably most exciting for me is how they're going to lift the rest of the group around them. And like I said, the belief too is exciting, not just for within the dressing room, but also as fans. Hey, this is what we've been waiting for. This is what TFC fans have been waiting for. I mean, fans are still going crazy about whether or not they're going to be there on Saturday because that's what's drawing people into the seats. And that's also another aspect of this whole thing is the excitement and the buzz around the fans. Bill Manning said that there hasn't been this much excitement around TFC since he's been here. That's where we're back at with this club.
Can I tell a quick personal story about a
Go for
game
it.
I went to a few days ago? So I'm in 113 U sector, supporter section, and these two guys came in whenever Insigne's first game was supposed to be. So like 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks
July
ago?
9th.
Yeah, the 9th, yeah.
Came in with his jerseys, and I was there with my dad, who is quite the colorful character. So he tapped them on the back and asked if they were big fans, and they said no, this is the first game they've ever been to. And I said, oh, are you Napoli fans then? And they said, well, we're Italian fans, so kind of makes us Napoli fans. And I thought, this is incredible. Like, you're buying supporter sections. They had never been to a TFC game before. They have bought jerseys just on a whim, having never really watched. They're not, Serie A fans necessarily. I mean, they're Italy fans, whatever. And they're coming to these games. I don't know, other than maybe the second season, if TFC have had this sort of, as Bill Manning said, this excitement around them. Yes, there was a little bit with Javinko, but I think those were people who were more, soccer fans kind of in the know. But now you're getting average fans who are not only willing to come to a game, but willing to spend, $140 on a jersey, which I don't think the average fan's going to do. So the excitement around the game, I think, is going beyond just what we kind of see in our Toronto FC bubble. I mean, I remember there was a time where I couldn't give away tickets. I would have to bribe people to come with me, saying that I would pay for the beer all night. And now random people off the street who have a mild interest of soccer know that there's something special. And I think that's the key, that people who aren't reading, every article, who aren't on forums, who aren't talking on Twitter, they know that there's something special. And I don't think we've ever seen that in the same sort of way.
And that's interesting you bring that up because I feel that too, but I still have to bring I am on those forums and I am reading those Twitter things and I almost am following this team on a game by game basis. And we all know this team is not good right now from a playing perspective, right? They're not. And I guess the question is, and you kind of brought this up, Sonia, so this is why I wanted to come back to this, but this sort of hype versus realistic expectation of what these guys can bring for the remainder of this season. I think us in the know, and probably a lot of people who are listening and watching this pod right now, realize that with 13 games left, they're going to need an almighty run here to maybe get the final playoff spot. So it's going to be tough. But I think a lot of those casual fans are going to come in and think, well, these guys should be just blowing people away. You've got Bernardeschi and you've got Insigne, like right? It may not exactly work out that way, at least at the beginning. So I guess, will it be fair, and basically, are we going to be able to have enough patience with them to let them bet into the team, to let them get used to MLS play, before the crowd starts thinking, well, what are we paying for here, right? Because I think there's going to be this sort of, from some corners, not everybody, but a bit of an expectation of, well, like, okay, the run starts here. All right, playoffs, let's go. When in fact, there's still a lot of holes on this team that have not been addressed, that may make a run like that pretty difficult for the remainder of the season.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I think we have to think, and obviously there is that sort of division, and this isn't gatekeeping or anything like that. It's just the reality of Toronto FC fans versus your casual fan. I think Toronto FC fans, we're starting at 0. This is a clean slate, whereas I think the average fan is like, oh, we're starting at 80, 90%. I've heard somebody kind of talk about them like when the Raptors got Kawhi Leonard, right? And it's like, we have this great player now, it's going to turn everything around. Well, I mean, with the Raptors, obviously he was here for a full season, but you had those other pieces already in place, right? You had a team that was already in the right mindset. Toronto FC, their confidence is at an all-time low. Like, I think even worse than, the 2008 to like Javinko years season. Yeah. I think the confidence is at a low because they have tasted that success and they are just at the bottom that they could possibly be, right? And I think the player that is going to be most affected by this, and I think that player will then transform the whole team, is, not to go back to him, but Michael Bradley, right? He's a player who's played in Italy. He's a player who has seen this mentality. He's a player who loved playing in Italy. If you watch some of his old interviews, like, he was a happy cat being there. Like, he loved it.
Fluent Italian.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if they can start turning his mentality around, that's going to filter down to the rest of the team. I think right now the team is a little bit starstruck, which is fine. Like, we have a lot of young kids and the world-class players are coming here. Totally understandable. But I think on a more tactical level, on a less superficial level, that if we can reinstill that confidence in Michael Bradley, that team is going to turn around. I don't think it's going to happen by the end of the season.
I think they're going to hit the ground running. I do.
Really? Okay.
I do.
Okay. Oh,
Go for it, man. Go for it.
I think that these players at this age are so far ahead of the rest of the league, talent-wise. And they're not just coming by themselves. Like, all three of them, the hope is that they're going to be on the pitch at the same time. And then you look at the addition as well as Mark Anthony Kaye. And, this isn't the same team we saw on Saturday, completely different. Jonathan Osorio transforms that midfield. If Osorio's in the lineup, Insigne's in the lineup, Bernardeschi's in the lineup, Jesus Jimenez is in the lineup, Crescito's in the lineup, all of a sudden you're looking at a team now that takes a lot of pressure off the next player. You mentioned Michael Bradley there. Michael Bradley's been asked to do a lot this year, through the first part of this year. He's been asked to carry so many young kids. He's been asked to just do so much work in the middle of the park. But you add Insigne and Bernardeschi into that lineup, and all of a sudden, those guys can keep the ball a little bit easier. You're not giving it to a DeAndre Kerr or a Jaden Nelson, who, well, I believe have really bright futures. They also struggle to keep possession.
That's true.
Insigne is one of the best in the world, I'd say, at keeping possession in tight areas, in tight spaces, and I think that'll just take some pressure off a lot of players with TFC. So I do think they're going to hit the ground running. Are they going to go on and win MLS Cup? No. Are they going to win every game the rest of the season? Probably not. But I do believe that these guys are going to come as advertised with Toronto FC.
Perfect. Okay, then. So, I mean, look, I look at it as a situation of, I think the two players can only help you both from obviously an attacking perspective, but also from a potentially from a defensive perspective. This was brought up on the Tunnel Club in terms of just, teams have to respect those players, right? And you can't just press like other teams have been pressing on TFC just because of the threat of one of those two breaking free on the wing and creating something. So it may actually take a little pressure off the team defensively, as well as added a dimension in attack. Right.
Yeah,
And
I think that's such a big point. And we were talking about the Italians, of course, but I also would group Marc-Anthony Kaye into that mix as well, as a guy who loves to do a lot of dirty work in the center of the park. He's struggled a little bit, in my opinion, his first couple of games, and I thought he really got exposed without Osorio on Saturday. But with Ozo in that lineup in the midfield, I think Marc-Anthony Kaye can focus a little bit more on what he does best, which in my opinion is kind of a hybrid of a destroyer a little bit, which will help the team defensively. And of course, as you mentioned there, Mike, Insigne keeping the ball, his threat moving forward, and Bernardeschi, they're going to take some pressure off the defense as well. So yeah, and Rob Badley talks about this all the time. When we stress about the clean sheets and team conceding goals, it's easy to point fingers at the back line and be like, okay, that's the problem. But it's a team game, it's a team sport, and there's so many different things that affect that. So yeah, it's going to be exciting, and I hope that I'm right, man.
Okay. So here's a question for you. Saturday's match coming up against Charlotte at home. How important is this? For a team that's second bottom in the Eastern Conference, this feels like this incredibly important game, even though realistically, from a standings perspective, doesn't mean that much, kind of. But how important is it for this team to get off on a good note with potentially both players either starting or making some appearance at some point during the game?
For me, it depends which lens we're looking at this through. If it's for this season, then yeah, it's incredibly important, not only to pick up the points in the table, but also to reinstill that belief within the team and also the fan base. I think that part's huge. But realistically, like both of these guys, Insigne and Bernardeschi, even Marc-Anthony Kaye, they're signed through 2026. Anything that for me that happens this season is a consolation. It's going to be icing on the cake. This is about 2023 for me, these signings and getting the core in place. But at the same time, yeah, some people might look at this as, you only get one first impression to make. And we look at what Pozuelo did. And I'll say this again, Pozuelo in his debut is what eased the fan base away from Sebastian Giovinco. He's what helped transition that fan base. In a similar light, where we're turning the page here on a new era, a new chapter, and they've got high expectations to live up to, and they'll get a glimpse of that, I guess, on Saturday, and we'll see how they do.
Yeah, to echo that, I don't think they could do badly. Like, I think it would take a lot if it was a complete disaster, right? Like, I don't think Charlotte's necessarily going to outperform us, or it's going to be a disaster.
They're actually a pretty decent side this year.
But I just mean in general, like, I don't think it's going to be like a complete blowout or a game that we've seen before. I think, again, it's setting your expectation as a fan and what kind of fan you are. If you're going to watch, world-class football on a Saturday, you probably won't get that. You might see, highlights or like a couple of fun things that, will clap and cheer. And I'm sure they'll both get standing ovations. Like, I don't doubt that. At the same time, though, if we don't concede past the 80th minute, to me, that's a win, right? And I think and I think that's where we have to sort of like think about where we're coming from. I don't think it's going to be a disaster. I don't think it's going to be a disappointment, but I don't think we're going to come out and like stomp 10-0, right? Like it's I think of this almost more of an exhibition game of like, we're going to show you what we have in store for the future. This game doesn't necessarily count. This isn't what's going to what's going to set the pace. This isn't going to be our do or die moment. And I think that Toronto has just had such a lackluster season, for lack of a better word, that just the idea of the pageantry on the field is going to appease fans, and no one does pageantry better than the Italians, to be completely honest. It's going to be a fun game. I think no matter what the scoreline is, it's going to be a fun game. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm not going to be like, well, this is how it's going to look in 6 weeks from now.
Fair. And you say that the Italians do pageantry. TFC does pageantry. It knows how to do pageantry. It almost feels like Saturday people are just going to forget that this team is second bottom in the Eastern Conference, which is crazy to me, but that's kind of where we're at right now. And also it's funny, Mike, you mentioned Pozuelo's debut. I feel like that's ruined DP debuts going forward because everybody thinks that's how a DP walks into Toronto FC and is going to perform. They're just going to Panenka a goalkeeper, and then they're going to chip one from the top of the 18. And, that's how all DPs start, right? I feel like that's what people are going to be walking in on and thinking that's what Bernardeschi is going to provide. But look, no matter which lens you're looking at it, to me, I look at it from a fan confidence lens, right? If you can go and put in a great performance where your DPs come out and play like DPs, and I'm not talking about a Pozuelo debut performance either, but you put up a solid performance, I think you start to win fans back, at least those who are kind of like, well, what the hell is this team doing, right? And I think there's a lot of people out there that feel that way because they just so much change has happened over the past 2 seasons that I think that if you can get this game and maybe the next couple on a decent note, then you start to get people to see the overall big picture, which in TFC land is hard to do because we're so into the day by day, game by game sort of lens that it's hard to step back and look at the big picture of things.
Yeah, I think that's well said.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll transition here into the Michael Singh notebook. We like to do this weekly and get sort of what's happening on the inner workings at BMO Training Ground. So, Mike, you were at the Bernardeschi presser. I was supposed to be there, but again, aforementioned, sick and snotty. Nobody wanted to see that. Don't want to get a DP sick.
I don't even want to hear about that.
Yeah,
the baby stopped me from going. So
yeah. So
totally
there's no point in, no, I don't want to be the guy who's like, and you're reporting like, Bernardeschi got sick. And it's like, I'm here at home. Like, sorry. But overall, I watched it. And I think everybody probably was listening to this, watched it as well. The vibes were, just the hearts were out to here, man. Like people have fallen in love with this guy already. What sort of you get out of the presser and sort of your impressions of him and sort of how he's relating to the fan base?
Yeah, I think you kind of hinted at it there. He has that personality. I think that's going to attract a lot of fans. He comes off as a really genuine, happy person who wants to be at Toronto FC, and I think that's the biggest thing I kind of got out of it, is that he genuinely was happy to be here. He was willing to answer a lot of the questions in English, even though his English wasn't the best. But even when he was messing up, I think the fan base could kind of appreciate that he was giving the effort or trying to, connect with the fan base. He was making a genuine attempt. Afterwards, we got to also chat with him and do a scrum with him. And same thing, like every answer he was giving it didn't come across as too, like during press conferences, there's standard answers that everyone can kind of give. He had a few of those, but there was a lot of it was, I could see what you're trying to say and I can see what you're coming from, and it doesn't sound disingenuous. So yeah, I think that's the biggest compliment I can give him personality wise. I think he's going to be a guy, as I mentioned, that fans are going to love because of that personality. He's obviously, Insigne is a little bit more reserved than Bernardeschi, but at the same time, I think Insigne is still the face of this franchise, but Bernardeschi might be in the spotlight a little bit more, just like being in the spotlight a little bit more, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about that because I felt like, though Insigne coming to town was a big deal, I felt like there was a little bit of, I don't see disconnection from the fans. I think I'm sure he's a pretty great guy and he's going to have his opportunity to connect with the fan base a bit more. But I felt like there was more of an immediate connection with Bernardeschi than there was with Insigne. And that might just be the nature of how they arrived and the circumstances and things like that. But I was going to ask you, like, did you feel like that there was this sort of dichotomy between the two in terms of how they were introduced to TFC land?
Yeah, I think two reasons why. At Insigne's presser, there was a small select group of fans, maybe 10, 15, that were allowed in the presser. You obviously have the language barrier. Insigne doesn't really speak a word of English except for all for one, as we all know. But he doesn't speak English very well, and he didn't take the time really afterwards to go embrace the fans. Whereas Bernardeschi speaks a little bit of English. I think fans could really understand him. And then obviously at the press conference, there was the supporter groups that were allowed to show up to Real Sports, and the drum was there, and everyone was chanting. Bernardeschi felt that energy, where at Insigne's press conference, it was a little bit different. So maybe it's part of it's also due to their personality. And I feel like Bernardeschi might have embraced that aspect of it more, as opposed to maybe Insigne, as I mentioned, would have been more reserved. But yeah, you're bang on by saying there was that impression you got, Mike, because I got the same thing.
Awesome. Now that we kind of have the two big DP pieces in, as you know, there's the inevitable, what are we doing with the third spot? Obviously, without giving too much away, go read his stuff on the parlay. You're not getting all the free stuff. But like, do you have a sense maybe of what direction TFC might go with that third DP spot? I mean, in terms of either filling it now or waiting till January, what do you think the vibe is in terms of that third spot?
They're going to wait till the winter, and unless something miraculous happens over these next 2 weeks. Bill Manning came out and all but confirmed that at the press conference when he was asked about the DP slots. And I think personally it's the right move, because us here, we're talking about Toronto FC and how there's never been more buzz or excitement around the club, perhaps maybe since Bloody Big Deal, maybe even ever. But so why go out and get another piece this summer? Why not let this summer play out, this season play out, take your time, find out what position you actually want to address, and then make another splash and reignite that fan base that was so excited from the summer. That's the way that I'm kind of looking at it. I don't know if this team wants to go out and invest in another DP defender. I don't think a striker is completely ruled out of the question, even though they've already invested in 2 other DP attackers. I think I've mentioned this on this show in the past. I think you have to go out and get a DP central midfielder, because Michael Bradley is obviously getting up there in age, and who knows what the future of Jonathan Osorio holds. And I think a central midfielder can impact the game in MLS a lot more than a DP defender, in my opinion. I don't know if the club is thinking along those same lines, but that's just my line of thought here.
Everybody who follows me on Twitter know I'm an N'Golo Kante stan, and I'm just saying he's out of contract. Just saying, 2023 he's out of contract. Just put that out in the world and see what happens.
I've been doing the same with Balotelli for ages, and no one's listening to me. I swear to God, if they ever sign Bala, like, I'm just gonna live at BMO. And I know no one agrees with me on this.
That shirt's gonna change. You're gonna have
100%. I have a Balo's back Milan scarf. I saw them play when he came back the second time in Milan, and like, still one of the best games in my life. Awesome. But I know no one agrees with me, so you can hold off your comments, don't at me, but follow till I die.
Well, Sonia, I was about to ask you, like, in terms of that DP spot, like, where ideally on the pitch would you want to see TFC sort of invest that? Because, like, to me it's a central, a 6, really. To me, I think it needs to be a 6. But an 8's fine too, but I think you got that in Mark Anthony K kind of, and depends on what happens with Osorio in the offseason, but where ideally would you want that sort of DP spot going?
Personally, and I realize that my philosophy is very different than most North Americans, especially in MLS, but to me, your most important position on the field is your center back. I know no one agrees with that. It's okay. Don't worry. I get it. But to me, that is your backbone. That is where you want the most important player to be, both in a defensive line and also to kind of get that ball moving forward as well. I don't think MLS necessarily looks at their back line as maybe Italy does, for example. I don't think we put enough importance on it. I do have a question, though, and I don't know if either one of you can answer it or if somebody in the comments can answer it. Has there ever been a goalkeeper DP in MLS history, or in DP history, I should say?
I don't think so. No,
there has. Okay. I'm not sure the name right now. I know there has, because I was
wondering
the same thing.
Did Atlanta make Brad? No, they didn't make Guzan a DP in Atlanta.
Tim Howard.
Oh, that's right. He did. Tim Howard. Yeah, in Colorado. Yeah,
Tim Howard.
Right. To me, like, that's not a bad shout either. Like, investing, even just sort of psychologically being like, we are putting our money in defense. We are stopping goals. I know there's a philosophy around, like, the one thing you're supposed to do in football is put the ball in the back of the net, but you also want to stop the other team from putting the ball in the back of the net. I don't think we should sign a goalkeeper as a DP. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that I find it really interesting, especially from, my upbringing, my watching, the leagues I watch, how that back line isn't more important or isn't considered, your first line of defense. I realize how ironic that is, but yeah, I would put all of my money in the back, and then not all of my money. I would put some of that money in the back, and then I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about the strikers, because you could score 1 million goals, but if you let in 1,000,001, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter.
Well, it and I've said this on the podcast before, in a lot of ways, this season kind of felt like the 2015 season without maybe the payoff of a playoff at the end. But the one thing that this club did really well in building that squad that eventually won everything was they built a really good spine, right? Mm-hmm. And that spine was from, you can argue goalkeeper, depending on how you saw Alex Bono O'Connor at the time, your center backs between Moore and Mavinga, Michael Bradley, Jonathan Osorio, Marco Delgado, that sort of three in the midfield, and then Seba and Josie, right? So you have this spine that was really good. And I think there's a potential here in 23 to start to build that spine back, right? It just depends on where they're going with that center back spot, whether you use a DP slot. I'm not necessarily against using a DP slot on a center back. I just think if you're going to do that, you got to be sure you have to 100, because it's a function of a dumb rule, really, in terms of how those tags are placed on players. But I still think if you are going to spend that money, it's got to be locked down, right? It's got to be somebody is fit all the time, is truly a communicator and a top level defender, to just to take that scrutiny, because Carlos Salcedo is a decent footballer, but I mean, in this team, he got exposed so many times. I mean, there's only so much you can do, right? Unless you're Virgil van Dijk, right? Like, essentially, like what is he going to do?
Yeah. And I think one thing you touched upon was important, the communication. In my head, a center back is a bit of an older player, a bit of a mature player. And going back to that mentorship that I was talking about earlier, I think too, just being able to kind of communicate and have that maturity in the back line. Like right now, Mavinga's sort of like our long-standing player. He's the one who defends the back. And I don't know if he's the right player to put all that pressure on. I don't think he's the one who's teaching that sort of next generation. I do think that center back spot has to be kind of like an older player who may not be, at his fastest or at the top of his game, but that's okay, because I think the intelligence is more important than the play at that position.
Okay. All right. So I feel like Michael does not agree with you. Whether or not.
I said my piece. I still don't believe you get the best out of a DP in MLS. It's been very rare where teams do get the best out of their DPs in MLS.
And I recognize that. That's why I wanted to preface it with, I know this may not work for MLS, but if I was building, my football manager team, that is where I would put my focus on. And unfortunately,
you're not wrong.
Kind of get out of that mindset, but
you're not wrong by saying center back's arguably the most important piece of a soccer team. I
That's
just
it.
think
Just finish the
that,
sentence there. Just finish that. You're not wrong.
yeah. Well, I just think in MLS that like the way that roster construction rules are so funny and funky, and I think that TFC can find a way to improve their back line without investing a DP spot in their center backs.
Well, and then that's sort of, and I'll move on from the point after this, but just the way that MLS Cup winning teams that win supporter shields get built is generally you spend all that DP money on your attackers, your midfielders, etc., and then you build kind of either an MLS experienced back line, or you find guys from, Central South America or Mexico on more team friendly deals that are solid players. They're not going to be spectacular. They're not going to make headlines. They're not going to be the guys who put bums in seats, but they're going to be the guys who are just solid pros. And that tends to be sort of the formula of how to do that. Seattle are a perfect example of that. And I maybe that's the way TFC eventually go. But I also feel like, could they surprise you with another DP center back? I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility if they find what they think is the right guy. But again, like I said, sort of dumb MLS roster building rules around DP tags kind of make it kind of costs / prohibitive essentially to really spend in that position in the way that I think it should be spent in. So with that, I'll move from there. In terms of you were at training on Tuesday, Mike, any notes that we should sort of that the fans should know about in terms of who was in training, how they've been training, any injuries to report?
Yeah, no, I was at training today. The one obviously major thing was Bernardeschi did train with the team today, which was eye-opening. But the team did say that it was just kind of load management because he just traveled to Toronto this week and he was inside doing work on his own. So that's the one notable thing. So we will get an answer on both Bernardeschi and Insigne's status tomorrow afternoon. You guys will hear whether or not they will be available for Saturday's game. My hunch is that unless Bernardeschi suffered some sort of injury or knock or setback, is that both guys will be available in some capacity for Saturday's match against Charlotte. So that part's exciting for TFC fans. The other injury, I think everyone else was healthy except Noble Okello and Chris Mavinga were training on their own as they both work back from injuries. This is actually the most work I've seen Noble do because he's obviously been sidelined with like a lower leg injury for months now. And then the other one is Quentin Westberg. He wasn't training today, which I believe he's picked up an injury. So we'll see. Stay tuned for that.
If you come back on Friday, and this is not, of course, not going to be your fault, but if you come back and say Bernardeschi picked up a knock, I believe Twitter will burn. Basically,
I believe they will too.
If somehow you say, "Oh, he picked up a knock and he's going to miss Saturday," oof. That's all I'm going to say. All right. Lastly, on the Michael Singh notebook section, just always get in today with transfer questions. Really, I sort of distilled it to this one. Now that we kind of know that the DP spot will be not until January, Bill Manning did mention that they're still looking to potentially add. Do you think this is going to be more of an intra-league, another trade opportunity to bring a potentially another player in? And they did point out the defensive side of things.
Is there any Daniil Henry fans out there?
I think I tweeted that.
Mike's the only one out there. That could be interesting if those two find a way to kind of connect, and let's just say it would make sense for both parties if TFC found a way to bring in Daniil Henry.
Well, look, I think that would be like the least shocking thing, if that, to me, right? Like it just, what do you got to lose? 13 games left, Yeah, might as well. You need the cover. Why not?
He needs minutes.
He needs minutes. He's probably going to come in at a decent number. Like he's not breaking the bank for you, right? You don't have
Axis of
to.
Evil is asking when was the last time Daniil played club football. This year he played for LAFC.
LAFC,
and
yeah, but I think his last game was in May. I think last time he got on the pitch was May, maybe early June. Was
perhaps,
last time
yeah.
he was on the pitch. Yeah.
Hey, this is a guy who played 5-6 games for Canada during their World Cup qualifying run. He's obviously a former TFC player. He's only 29 years old, and he knows the league, obviously, with over 100 games spent in Major League Soccer. The bar right now, TFC's back line, is pretty low. So I think any sort of support they can get there, reinforcements that they can get there at a cost-efficient clip, I think is it's a no-brainer for both parties, in my opinion. And yeah, we'll see on that front. We'll see what happens.
Okay, so they're not trading all the
Stay
kids for
tuned.
Walker Zimmerman, basically, is what you're telling me.
I don't think that's in the cards.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. All right, awesome. All right, let's get this show wrapped up here. We'll go to the final segment of the show, which is the TFC Live, #TFC Live, 3 burning questions of the week. We got a few in here. Thank you for everybody who submitted questions. A lot of them were transfer based, so I tried to wrap a few of those into the notebook, and a lot of them also were around sort of Bernardeschi fit into the team. So that was sort of the first segment. So thank you for everybody for sending those over to myself. But the first question here was an interesting one. I kind of got asked on the Tunnel Club this week, but it's got asked again, and it was kind of interesting. I didn't get a straight answer, so I'd love to get both of your thoughts on this. Why isn't Jaquil Marshall-Rutty getting as many minutes as he did early on in the season? This is attributed to at TFC to go. There were a few other people that asked the question, so I amalgamated it into one question. But just in terms of JMR, obviously he was kind of penciled in as a starting right back, got injured, has come back from injury now, but not seeing as many minutes. Just in terms of maybe, Mike, what you're seeing in training, Sonia, just in terms of what you've seen on the pitch since he's been back, what do you think JMR is just not getting as many minutes as he was prior to his injury?
Do you want to start, Sonia?
Sure. I mean, obviously, Michael, you're going to have a little bit more insight on this for me, but just from, a watching perspective, I think there's been a lot of rotation in general. I think that Bradley is not, I don't want to say he's trying to find the right combination, because that's just not going to happen. But it could also, it is sort of the idea that I think he's trying different combinations, or it looks like he's trying different combinations from the stands, and that maybe the combinations aren't necessarily working off the pitch either, or on the training field. Personally, I thought he was a fine player. Nothing necessarily stand out, but I don't know if he fits with whatever Michael Bradley's overall, or Bob Bradley, overall vision is. But Michael, you probably have a lot more insight than that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Obviously, when a young player, especially of his stature, goes through knee surgery, you want to ease that player back. During that time, Kosi Thompson's kind of emerged as a reliable piece in the back line. Now, personally, I think JMR is way better, has way more upside, and I think should start over Kosi. But the thing that this team was missing was, well, we talk about defense, and what Kosi brings is he's a big kid. He's strong. He battles. There's reliability there. With JMR, I think there would be a little bit more. You don't have that physicality aspect with him, and I think he could be prone to being bullied in an already thin back line. So I think that's also factoring in. Another thing is the transfer interest around Jaquil is real. I don't know if he is a long-term solution at right back for Toronto FC. And regardless, I know people are going to say, well, don't you want to showcase him? It's still there. The transfer interest is still there. Big clubs are calling about Jaquil Marshall-Rutty. And it might make more sense for the club to not only get that stability and reliability at a Kosi right now, just building Kosi as potentially a right back for this team in the future. So I think that's kind of the best way that I've interpreted the situation. I still think Jaquil, in my opinion, the team would be better off if Jaquil is starting every game for them.
Okay, perfect. I have no personal thought on JMR, but other than yeah, I think Kosi's been playing a stretch of games. He's not everybody's favorite. I get that, but he's been playing consistently. So you just keep rolling on with a player that's playing consistently. I think that's kind of the main point. And you can get Jaquil when you can get Jaquil in. Second question. And this goes back to something you were saying earlier, Sonia. That's why, again, I kind of want to put a button in it because I want to come back to this. The question, should TFC be all in on the Canadian Championship, which is next week? The final is next week in Vancouver. I think a lot of people have been seeing Vancouver post every kind of ticket promotion possible to get people out to BC Place. So should they be pushing for the Canadian Championship, or should they be all in on trying to get that final playoff spot at this point? 13 games left. We kind of talked about it earlier, but where do you feel TFC should be pushing all their eggs in what basket? Mike, I'll go with you first.
Both. Can I say both? No, I don't think so. 2022 for me, again, as I mentioned, the regular season playoffs will be a consolation prize. I don't think the season is completely written off. But I do think with Charlotte coming up, and as you mentioned, Charlotte's a good side, Mike, but I do still think that they can rotate their squad and still get 3 points against Charlotte and still have a squad that's strong enough to compete against Vancouver in the Canadian Championship. I think both can be accomplished. I do really believe that. If I had to pick one at this point in time, it's the Canadian Championship, just because it benefits you more for 2023. And I think, again, that's what the club is kind of looking towards.
Sonia?
Yeah, I'm going to echo that. I think the Canadian Championship, I mean, I'm old school, right? Like you play for the cup, and I realize that, playoffs also equal the cup, but play for the cup that you're more likely to get. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I don't think that if we focus on one, the other one's completely out of the water. It would be nice if we qualified, if we did make that playoff spot. I think that would be pretty much a miracle of the season. I don't think people realize how difficult that's going to be at this point in time. So it would be a nice win. I don't think they're going to get very far, unfortunately. I do think, just from a supporter perspective, the more home games we can play at BMO, the better it is for mentality, for positivity, for our new players who just came in to kind of see that fan base and to see, what they're playing for. I mean, cliche, but I do think Toronto, when our stadium is full, we do have some of the best fans in the world. I think that is remain true. So it would be just nice for them to see how the city is supporting them. But I mean, if you have a cup within reach, go for it. Put it all in for there, and then worry about playoffs afterwards, because it is so close too that I think both can be attainable.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Obviously, one, the Voyageurs Cup to me is incredibly important. It's probably my favorite cup. And obviously it gets you in the Champions League next year, which I think this team would like to have sort of that full squad with Insigne, Bernardeschi, your third DP, all the signings and moves that they made, then debuting, in February of next year in the Champions League. That would be nice. But I also think that if this team can make the run of runs and get into the playoffs, I can see this team riding a wave and maybe not a cup final, right? If you think back in 2019, right? They go off and they get one big win in Montreal, and then away they go, right? They go unbeaten for almost the rest of the season up until the cup final, right? They don't lose it again until the cup final. If you can get on a wave like that, like you said, Sonia, I think BMO would be beyond electric. I think it would be on a level maybe close to 2017, but maybe even more than that, just because of where this team had been up until basically your two Italian saviors come in, right? And then where they end up, and once they make this run. So if they can, it would be amazing. I don't think they will, but if they could make that run, go for it. Why not? Like, just get into that playoff spot. And once you're in an MLS Cup playoff, it's a one-off. Anything can happen at that point.
So what's your answer?
My answer is you probably go for the cup. You go for the cup. Which may not actually satisfy everybody, because again, you may rest like Insigne. You may not start him on Saturday, play him a few minutes on Saturday, then start him in the cup, right? So it depends on how they want to play that out. Final question for 3 burning questions this week is from one at Brendan Dunlop. He asked, where is Michael Singh practicing his Italian? Because Duolingo isn't doing it for Brendan Dunlap. So, Michael, I'm going to give you the floor. Can you give us a sentence in Italian?
No chance. My Italian is terrible. I've even been to Italy. I traveled there actually when I was younger for a soccer tournament, believe it or not. And me and my family stayed back a little bit longer. We spent like 3 weeks. So if you asked me then, I would be able to go up and order like a gelato from a counter in Italian, but I have lost that. It's been so bad. And I got to shout out actually the team interpreter, because I watch her do her job where she's translating for these guys. And I'm like, I don't know. 'Cause sometimes the sentences go on for like over a minute. And you're like, how the heck do you keep track of what they're saying? To be honest, you could be completely lying to me. Like, they could have came in and they said, man, these fans suck. I can't believe I'm getting such a poor reception in Italian.
Can't believe I came here.
It off and just be like, yeah, the TFC fans are the best in the world. I'm so happy to be here. I would not know if you're telling the truth or lying. So I keep telling her she's doing a good job, but to be honest, I don't actually know if she's doing a good job. It's just she makes what's apparently difficult look really easy. So I got to give a shout out to her, because we'd obviously be lost without her.
I feel like John Molinaro would tell you if they were kind of like BSing you. No?
So JMO can understand a little bit of Italian, or he can understand Italian pretty decent amount, but he can't speak it. So I don't know if I trust JMO as a source, man. JMO, if you're watching this, I don't know, man.
All right, awesome. Well, we'll wrap up there. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode of Toronto Till I Die. We'll be back on our usual time, Monday at 3 p.m. next week. Listen to myself, Sean Levy, at the Tunnel Club. We'll have our day after show on Sunday. I'm hoping to get out to the game on Saturday. I may actually not, but I will. If I can, I'll definitely be watching on television. Follow Michael Singh at Michael Singh 94 on Twitter. Thank you, Sonia, for coming in and doing a great job on the show. You can follow her at Sonia Miso. Again, Sonia, thanks so much for jumping in today.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be a ringer anytime.
Awesome. Other than that, guys, enjoy the weekend. Hopefully, it's a 3 points in the bag. Hopefully you get all your Insigne and Bernardeschi dreams fulfilled at BMO Field. Other than that, guys, take care. Talk to you next time.
And wait, and baby, I'm TFC till I die.